Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We are back, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all so much for your patience. I know, I've really tried to do a daily upload once a day, but unfortunately life happens sometimes, and you have to take care of other things that are a top priority. And, of course, a priority of mine is providing you guys that continuous content here on the channel. But, of course, business comes first, life comes first, and I need to take care of those things before we dive into here. So we do have a new schedule. We're going to be doing videos Monday through Friday, so no videos over the weekend, and that is going to continue for the foreseeable future. I think that allows me to get a little bit of a breather before I put out some more weather content for you guys. And remember, this is completely free as far as the YouTube channel is concerned. We do have a weather consulting company called Prestige Weather. You can find more information in the bio below. You will also, by the way, notice in the video that I don't have my face cam on. And the reason why is because it is late in the evening at the time of me recording this video, and there is no light in my room, and I'm in the process of getting a new lamp and new lighting for this room. So I'm not trying to hide my face. Believe me when I say I still have a crap ton of hair on the top of my head. I've not cut that off yet at all. By the way, that leads into the next point that once we do hit 1,000 subscribers on this channel, I will be doing a live stream where I buzz all of my hair off, and that's going to be donated to the St. Baldrick's Foundation for those who have lost their hair and are dealing with pediatric cancer. So that goal still remains, even though I haven't been active on the channel in the last few days. That all in mind, let's get into today's weather topic. And this is something that I feel a lot of people aren't talking about. I know there's been quite a bit of discussion about the potential heat wave that's going to make its way into the lower Great Lakes and into the Central Plains once again as we get into later on this week, and we'll see well above average temperatures extend from Minnesota back even into the eastern provinces of Canada. But there's something else going on in the immediate term that we seriously need to talk about. Take a look at the Pacific Northwest. Now, what you're looking at right now is the long wave infrared imagery. This is just showing us just cloud tops and temperatures of these clouds at the peak of them. And so we do have a lot of stratiform precipitation extending from Oregon all the way up through Washington and even British Columbia. This is an association with a pretty strong shortwave trough that is bringing in mid to upper level winds in excess of over 100 knots. Actually, at one point this morning, it was around 100 knots of mid-level flow. So this is a really dynamic system that we're talking about here. And also the concern really is the potential for flooding for areas like Oregon and Washington. Now you're probably wondering though, well, Brendan, what does that have to do with anything? I mean, there's flooding in many areas. We saw Ophelia give a lot of flooding concerns to the Carolinas and the Northeast New England. Well, we're going to get into that during today's video. What makes the Northwest situation more unique than, say, Tropical Storm Ophelia or the precipitation we're seeing in Florida? We're going to break all that down during today's video. So if you do enjoy today's video, despite the fact that there is no face cam, if you still enjoy today's video, be sure to like and subscribe, share with family and friends who will likely be impacted by the flooding concerns in the Pacific Northwest. I'm talking about you, Washington and Oregon, as well as Northern California. We want to make sure that this video goes out to those folks and that they're well informed. And that all in mind, let's get into today's video. All right, folks, let's get right into it. And my goodness, where to even start with this system? Let's begin first with really what's going on in the United States. We do have this occluded low that's over the lower Great Lakes. That's going to continue to get sheared out once it moves eastward. And by the way, for folks in the lower Great Lakes, I know, this isn't the topic of the video, but an honorable mention for you in the lower Great Lakes of Illinois, Indiana, getting back towards Michigan, Wisconsin, you're going to be dealing with this occluded low for the next couple of days. When these lows really begin to bomb out and decay at the end of their life cycle, they do begin to slow down quite a bit. So we are expecting to see some shower and even some thunderstorm activity going into both Tuesday and Wednesday. It's going to seem kind of like a crappy day, Tuesday and Wednesday, but by the time we get to Thursday, that should begin to get sheared out and move off to the east. That is then going to usher in this upper level ridge that we see positioned once again over the central portion of the plains, extending back into the Four Corner States. And because we're in this progressive pattern, that will also shift east with time. And I know a lot of folks in the weather community have been talking about it. I know the Climate Prediction Center has talked about it. We're expecting some well above average temperatures for this large swath of the central United States going into late this week and early next week. So it's not going to feel like fall. It's going to feel still like summer once we get into that time period, potentially seeing temperatures well into the 80s for many spots. So we'll have to watch that space. But today's video is focusing on this guy, this large shortwave trough that is moving ever so closer to the Pacific Northwest. As a matter of fact, take a look at this. This is, by the way, the 200 millibar jet field, and this is what we consider our upper level jet. Look at how strong that is. We are talking about over 120 knots at the 200 millibar level. Just to put that in perspective, that is something north of 140 miles per hour. Once you get up, say, above, I would say 7 to 9 kilometers high in the atmosphere, that is pretty darn strong. And also what's amazing about this system and how dynamic it is, this is southwesterly flow. And what's really unique is that typically at the 200 millibar level is when we start to see our winds be more backed, right? We see more westerly flow, and this type of flow is something that you might expect in the low levels. Well, not the case at all. You're going to see in our earlier sounding that we pulled from Seattle, Tacoma, which was from this morning, that we have southwesterly flow throughout the entire profile, from the surface getting all the way up to 12 kilometers. So this system is incredibly powerful. We're seeing a lot of shower and even some thunderstorm activity just off the coast here of the Pacific Northwest. And this system is going to continue to also move to the east. And when it does, it's going to bring some pretty significant implications as far as damaging winds are concerned, and we'll talk about that here later on in the video. But the one big takeaway is we have this large shortwave trough that continues to move off to the east-southeast, bringing with it the chance of some extensive flooding concerns along the Pacific coastline of the Northwest. And even what you're going to find is some damaging winds and even some pretty high wave heights. One thing that I didn't talk about in this video, but I am going to mention it here, there is a high surf advisory along the coastline of Northern California and extreme southwestern Oregon. That's because we have pretty strong winds that are steering water against the coast. We could be seeing waves upwards of 25 feet with this system. So if that doesn't say it all, I don't know what will, because this system is incredibly strong. By the way, the reason why we have such a strong wind field, well, keep in mind we have cold air to the north, right? This is a low pressure, so it's coming from the poles. That is colder temperatures aloft, interacting with this building ridge of high pressure that sits over the central United States. So if we know anything about meteorology, the big takeaway is that because we have these strong winds, you can thank your horizontal temperature gradient between your area of high pressure to the south and your low pressure to the north. Just an incredible thing, guys. You can tell by the other videos that I've done and even the videos I do now, I really do get into this stuff. And I don't even live in the Northwest, but it is something that I did want to cover for you guys. This is taking a look here at the Seattle-Tacoma radar at the time of making this video. This has been the theme throughout much of today, an extensive area of showers and even some thunderstorms. You notice that your higher reflectivity amounts are more amplified once it moves over higher terrain. So we are experiencing more intense precipitation, more intense convection, because what happens is when your winds are moving out of the southwest, they're going to be moving over the windward side of the mountains. And that additional forcing is going to allow for convection to be even more enhanced than it would be closer to the surface, down towards, say, the levels of Seattle, back towards, say, Medford, Oregon. So that has certainly been the theme over the last several hours. That will continue to be the theme as we go into the next couple of days. As I alluded to in the beginning of the discussion, this is early morning weather sounding from Seattle. The big takeaway from this, as I mentioned at the top of the discussion, first of all, look at your wind barbs, guys. This is out of the southwest, from the surface all the way up, 15 kilometers high. Very little in the way of backed winds. This is all veered throughout the entire profile. Now, we're not talking about veering in the sense that we're seeing rotation. We're just talking about the fact that our winds are out of the southwest. And I should actually correct myself. It isn't veering, right? Because if I was veering, these winds would be turning with height. We're actually seeing predominantly southwesterly flow all throughout the profile. So I am going to correct myself on the fly. I didn't mean to say veering. Mostly just wanted to get across the point that our winds are from the southwest of the surface and they go all the way through the entire profile. The other thing to note, take a look from this morning, your profile. Do you notice how your dew point and your temperature are pretty much on top of each other? With the exception of the 850, you have a very saturated profile, meaning that our air parcel is saturated right at the surface. You can even see that by the fact that our LCL is literally at the surface at about 1,000 millibars. So what that tells us is this is a very precipitous profile from our forecast sounding. I will mention, like I said, there is a little bit of some dry air entrainment between 850 and 700. This was taken this morning, and to be honest with you guys, I would expect that that has changed significantly since this morning. But I could be wrong. But the point is, at least your profile, with the exception of the 850, is pretty darn saturated. Your PWatt is 1.23, which for this area is pretty decent, right? We're not talking about what we saw with Tropical Storm Ophelia in the Northeast, where our PWatt values were over 2 inches. Instead, this is a little bit more on the Pacific moisture side of things. 1.23, still above average for our PWatt, climatologically speaking, but with these kind of systems, it is of no surprise to get a little bit more elevated PWatts than you might see on a typical system moving through Seattle as well as Oregon, Washington. Lapse rates are pretty quiet. We're not talking about severe weather here. You do have a bit of CAPE. It's not much, so there is just a slight layer of instability. So I would say, as we sort of look at the models towards the end of the discussion, I'll be sure to kind of point this out. I do expect that our CAPE profile will begin to move onshore once our cold front begins to move onshore. So we may have more thunderstorm activity, unlike what we've seen over the last 24 hours. And that's important because if we get more intense cells towards the surface, we could be talking about higher rainfall amounts towards the surface, just like the rainfall amounts we're expecting up at higher elevations. But the point that I want to foreshadow is that we do expect our higher precipitation amounts to be at higher elevations as opposed to what we might see towards the surface. More on that later. Last thing I want to point out is look at your shear. From surface to 3, 54 knots. Boy, is that strong. Surface to 8 kilometers, 85 knots. Your LCL to EL is 54. You got very strong wind shear aloft, very strong flow aloft, and a lot of that even still, as of the evening, at the time of making this video, are still coming out of the southwest. This is the current observations at the time of this video, so this would be as of this evening. And temperatures are very Pacific-like, right? You got highs in the mid-50s at this time, a couple of 60-degree temperatures. Your dew points are sitting right in the 50s. Overall, relative humidity is a lot higher once you get closer to the shoreline. But as you move away and you get towards the leeward side of the mountain chain, which extends all the way up the Pacific Coast Highway, you notice this significant drop-off in your dew points. That is something of concern. I know the discussion has been driven mostly so far towards the flooding and even a little bit towards the winds, but the other hazard that we have to be concerned about is the fire risk for this portion of the country. That would be south central Oregon. Let me go ahead and just switch screens there. There we go. Sorry for the blurriness there. But it's going, like I said, the fire conditions really are rampant for south central Oregon. The reason being is because we have actually experienced some drought conditions in this region over the last several weeks that are continuing to worsen. One thing that I want to point out before we dive into that discussion, just to emphasize the point, take a look at your precipitable water values, pretty much confined to the coastline. That's where we're expecting to see most of our heavier rainfall amounts. Again, the highest totals are going to be at higher elevations, But if you're talking about just the surface in comparison to other localities across the Pacific Northwest, it's going to be in the areas that have higher precipitable water values, and that's going to be towards right to the west of the Pacific Coast Highway, Interstate 5. Now, back to my previous discussion. I apologize, my screen got a little bit blurry and I had to fix that, so I got a bit sidetracked. But from the drought that we're experiencing in south central Oregon, coupled with the fact that we have very strong southwesterly winds, low relative humidity values, very strong winds, that is the perfect recipe for fire weather conditions. So we are going to see here on this very map where we have our red flag warnings that are in effect for south central Oregon. We also have some flood watches for northwestern California and extreme southwestern Oregon. It's really a tale of two areas, right? The rest of the country is overall pretty darn quiet. But if you look back towards Oregon, we have two completely different situations here separated by higher elevation. We have flooding concerns out towards the west coast of the Pacific Northwest, as we mentioned a few times already, but then we also have a red flag warning for areas east of that. Now, for the flooding, the biggest concern that I have is this. This rainfall, we're not going to be seeing high rainfall amounts per hour. You might have heavier rainfall at times with some of those more elevated convective bands that move through Tuesday into Wednesday. The big concern, however, is because the system is moving so slow, it is going to allow for rain to accumulate, right? And for runoff to take place. That is especially true for areas in southwestern Oregon that have multiple burn scars that are littered all around this region. Why is that a problem? Well, if you've been experiencing drought, which the drought, ironically, is on the western part of the state, and it's actually a lot less once we get into the red flag area. So this area that's under a flood watch is actually dealing with worse drought conditions than what we're seeing in the southeastern quadrant of Oregon. That's number one. Anytime you're dealing with drought and you're dealing with a large amount of rain on the order of a few inches over a few day period, the soil is not rejuvenated yet. It is just getting dampened by this precipitation. So a lot of that is just going to run off. We have also had wildfires in this region, which have left burn scars. These burn scars, when they fill up with water, they essentially liquefy. It essentially is like a concrete effect, and it brings down the mountain in the form of a mudslide or landslide. So anybody that's going to be commuting within these areas of southwestern Oregon, you need to be on high alert for that. Even if you think you're in the clear, remember, mudslide, landslides, they can hit at any time under the right conditions, and we do have the right conditions for that. And back towards our red flag warning. Do not, under a red flag warning, do any prairie burns. Try to avoid any campground fires or anything like that. Of course, seek official local guidance for mandatory orders that are in place. But you want to try to avoid that and be respectful of those orders if they are in place, because these fires can spread very rapidly under these conditions. So, as I said, a tale of two cities here between western Oregon and southeastern Oregon. A lot to digest even within this part of the country. Now, here is the total precipitation forecast, and you can tell a huge difference between areas of higher elevation versus towards the surface. You notice that rainfall amounts in excess of 6 to even 10 inches of rain are likely for portions of, especially getting up towards the northern portion of the mountain chain in Washington. I believe, if I remember correctly, that's the Cascades, if I'm correct about that. The Cascades will likely receive the most precipitation. Even back towards Mount St. Helens, that is going to, definitely have higher totals than what we see towards the surface. A lot of that being due to that orographic influence. And then finally, I actually might have skipped over a slide here, but what I was going to show you guys was a slide that would show the winds. And if we were to highlight this, and actually what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to minimize this and see if I can't find that. I guess not. It's not on here. Oh, well, that's okay. I'm going to draw it for you right now. So we have the cold front that is out towards the Pacific Northwest, right? And this is going to continue to swing eastward. And when it does, we could potentially be seeing anywhere between 50 to 60 miles per hour of winds towards the surface. So gusts potentially up to 60, not on the mountains, but at lower elevations. It's not just going to be the rainfall risk and flooding concerns. It's not just going to be the wildfire risk. It's going to be the damaging wind risk. If you are in any of these areas, you want to make sure that you're weather aware. Turn around, don't drown. Make sure to always avoid any flooded roadways and report any terrible road conditions to local officials if necessary. Like I said, I do apologize. I thought I had the wind map on here, but that's totally fine. Again, 50 to 60 mile per hour winds can be expected with this system once the cold front swings through by the time we get into Tuesday and Wednesday. Well, hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. And as I mentioned at the top of the video, be sure to like and subscribe, share with family and friends who will likely be impacted by this event. And we will see you all tomorrow on our next weather video. Take care and have a great night.